Okay, boys and girls, we are on our last two chapters of Charlotte's Web. Can you believe it? It's gone so fast. And I have another book picked out as our next read aloud, so I'll tell you about that tomorrow. All right, so chapters 21 and 22 are the last two we're going to read, and this one, number 21, is called The Last Day. Now, when we ended, this was the chapter where Wilbur had his hour of triumph, which means he had won the prize and the $25, and he had fainted, if you remember, and Templeton bit his tail to get him to wake up, and Avery was clowning around, showing off for the judges, right? And Charlotte had made her egg sack and was getting a little bit weaker, and she was hiding up in the corner with her egg sack. So this one's called The Last Day. Charlotte and Wilbur were alone. The families had gone to look for Fern. Templeton was asleep. Wilbur lay resting after his excitement and strain of recovery. His medal still hung from his neck. By looking out of the corner of his eye, he could see it. "Charlotte," said Wilbur after a while, "why are you so quiet?" "I like to sit still," she said. "I've always been rather quiet." "Yes, but you seem especially so today. Do you feel all right?" "A little tired, perhaps, but I feel peaceful. Your success in the ring this morning was, to a small degree, my success. Your future is assured. You will live secure and safe, Wilbur. Nothing can harm you now. These autumn days will shorten and grow cold. The leaves will shake loose from the trees and fall. Christmas will come and the snows of winter. You will live to enjoy the beauty of the frozen world. For you mean a great deal. To Zuckerman, and he will not harm you ever. Winter will pass, the days will lengthen, the ice will melt in the pasture pond. The song sparrow will return and sing, and the frogs will awake, and the warm wind will blow again. All these sights and sounds and smells will be yours to enjoy. Wilbur, this lovely world and these precious days. Charlotte stopped. A moment later, a tear came to Wilbur's eye. "Charlotte, oh, to think that when I first met you, I thought you were cruel and bloodthirsty." When he recovered from his emotion, he spoke again. "Why did you do all this for me?" he asked. "I don't deserve it. I've never done anything for you." "You have been my friend," replied Charlotte, "and that in itself is a tremendous thing. I wove my webs for you because I liked you. After all, what's a life anyway? We're born, we live a little, and we die. A spider's life can't help being something of a mess with all this trapping and eating flies. By helping you, perhaps I was trying to lift up my life a trifle. Heaven knows anyone's life can stand a little of that." "Well," said Wilbur, "I'm not good at making speeches, and I haven't got your gift for words, but you have saved me, Charlotte, and I would gladly give my life for you. I really would." "I'm sure you would," said Charlotte, "and I thank you for your very generous sentiments." "Charlotte," said Wilbur, "we're all going home today. The fair is almost over. Won't it be wonderful to be back in the barn again with the sheep and the geese? Aren't you anxious to get home?" For a moment, Charlotte said nothing. Then she spoke in a voice so low, Wilbur could hardly hear the words. "I will not be going back to the barn," she said. Wilbur leapt to his feet. "Not going back?" he cried. "Charlotte, what are you talking about?" "I'm done for," she replied. "In a day or two, I will be gone. I haven't even strength enough to climb down into the crate. I doubt if I've got enough silk in my spinnerets even to lower me to the ground." Hearing this, Wilbur threw himself down in an agony of pain and sorrow. Great sobs racked his body. He heaved and grunted with desolation. "Charlotte," he moaned, "Charlotte, my true friend." "Come now, let's not make a scene," Charlotte said. "Be quiet, Wilbur. Don't thrash about." "But I can't stand it. I won't leave you here alone to die. If you're going to stay here, I will stay too." "Oh, don't be ridiculous," said Charlotte. "You can't stay here. Zuckerman and Lurvy and John Arable and the others will be back any minute, and they'll shove you into that crate and away you'll go. Besides, it wouldn't make any sense for you to stay. There will be no one to feed you. The fairgrounds will soon be empty and deserted." Wilbur was in a panic. He raced around and around in the pen. Suddenly, he had an idea. He thought of the egg sack and the 514 little spiders that would hatch in the spring. If Charlotte herself was unable to go home to the barn, at least he must take her children along with him. Wilbur rushed to the front of his pen. He put his front feet on the top board and gazed around. In the distance, he saw the Arables and the Zuckermans approaching, and he knew he had to act quickly. "Where's Templeton?" he demanded. "He's in that corner under the straw asleep," said Charlotte. Wilbur rushed over, pushed his strong snout under the rat, and tossed him up into the air. "Templeton!" screamed Wilbur. "Pay attention!" The rat, surprised out of a sound sleep, looked first dazed and then disgusted. "What kind of monkey shine is this?" he growled. "Can't a rat catch a wink of sleep without being rudely popped into the air?" And do you remember, Templeton had gone and eaten all that food at the fair, so he was big and had his belly all full and was trying to sleep. Do you remember? "Listen to me," cried Wilbur. "Charlotte is very ill. She only has a short time to live. She cannot accompany us home because of her condition. Therefore, it is absolutely necessary that I take her egg sack with me. I can't reach it because I can't climb. You're the only one who can get it. There's not a second to be lost. The people are coming. They'll be here. Please, 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 Templeton, please climb up and get the egg sack." The rat yawned, straightened out his whiskers, and then looked up at the egg sack. "So," he said in disgust, "so it's old Templeton to the rescue again, is it? Templeton do this, and Templeton do that. Templeton, please run down to the dump for a magazine clipping. Templeton, please lend me string so I can spin a web." "Hurry," said Wilbur. "Please hurry, Templeton." But the rat was in no hurry. He began imitating Wilbur's voice. "So it's 'Hurry up, Templeton,' is it?" he said. "Ho, ho! And what thanks do I ever get for these services, I would like to know? Never a kind word for old Templeton. Only wisecracks and side remarks. Never a kind word for a rat." "Templeton," said Wilbur in desperation, "if you don't stop talking and get busy, all will be lost, and I will die of a broken heart. Please climb up." Templeton laid back in the straw. Lazily, he placed his forepaws behind his head, crossed his knees in an attitude of complete relaxation. "Die of a broken heart," he mimicked. "How touching. My. I notice it's always me you come to when in trouble. But I've never heard of anyone's heart breaking on my account. Oh, no. Who cares anything about old Templeton?" "Get up!" screamed Wilbur. "Stop acting like a spoiled child." Templeton just smiled and laid very still. "Who made trip after trip to the dump?" he said. "Why, it was old Templeton. Who saved Charlotte's life by scaring that Arable boy with that rotten egg? Bless my soul, I believe it was Templeton. Who bit your tail and got you back on your feet in front of the crowd? Old Templeton. Has it ever occurred to you that I'm sick of running errands and doing favors? What do you think I am, anyway? A rat of all works?" Wilbur was desperate. The people were coming. The rat was failing him. Suddenly, he remembered Templeton's fondness for food. "Templeton," he said, "I will make you a solemn promise. Get Charlotte's egg sack for me, and from now on, I will let you eat first when Lurvy gives me slops. I will let you have your choice of everything in the trough, and I won't touch a thing until you're through." The rat sat up. "Do you mean that?" he said. "I promise, cross my heart," said Wilbur. "All right, it's a deal," said the rat. He walked to the wall and started to climb. His stomach was still swollen from all the food he had eaten the night before. Groaning and complaining, he pulled himself slowly up to the ceiling. He crept along until he reached the egg sack. Charlotte moved aside for him. She was dying, but she still had enough strength to move a little. Then Templeton bared his long, ugly teeth and began snipping the threads that fastened the sack to the ceiling, while Wilbur watched from below. Here's the picture. Now look carefully. You'll see Charlotte. Do you see her up there? There she is. So Templeton's very gently pulling those off the threads and putting that very gently inside his mouth. Now you can see how small that egg sac actually is, right? Because spiders are very small. Okay, whew, it's a good thing he agreed to do that, huh? Use extreme care, said Wilbur. I don't want a single one of those eggs to be harmed. This stuff sticks in my mouth, complained the rat. It's worse than caramel candy. But Templeton worked away at the job and managed to cut the sack and carry it to the ground. And he dropped it in front of Wilbur. Wilbur heaved a great sigh of relief. Thank you, Templeton, he said with tears in his eyes. I will never forget this as long as I live. Neither will I, said the rat, picking his teeth. I feel like I've eaten a spool of thread. Well, home we go. Templeton crept into the crate and buried himself into the straw. He got out of sight just in time. Lurvy and Mr. Arable and Mr. Zuckerman came right at that moment, followed by Mrs. Arable and Mrs. Zuckerman and Avery and Fern. Wilbur had already decided how he would carry the egg sack. There was only one way possible. He carefully took the little bundle in his mouth and held it there, right on top of his tongue. He remembered what Charlotte had told him, that the sack was waterproof and strong. It felt funny on his tongue and made him drool a little bit. And of course he couldn't say anything. But as he was being shoved into the crate, he looked up at Charlotte and gave her a wink. She knew he was saying goodbye in the only way he could, and she knew her children were safe. Goodbye, she whispered. Then she summoned all of her strength and gently waved one of her legs at him. Charlotte never moved again after that. The next day, as the Ferris wheel was being taken apart and the racehorses were being loaded into the vans and the entertainers were packing up their belongings and driving away, Charlotte died. The fairgrounds were soon deserted. The sheds and buildings were empty and forlorn. The infield was littered with bottles and trash. Nobody of the hundreds of people that had visited the fair knew that a gray spider had played the most important part of all, and no one was with her when she died. All right, this is our last chapter, boys and girls. Chapter 22, A Warm Wind. That was a sad ending to that chapter, wasn't it, that Charlotte died? But this will be a nice, happy ending to our story. So this is a lovely chapter, our last one. Are you ready? Okay. And so Wilbur came home to his beloved manure pile in the barn cellar. This was a strange homecoming. Around his neck he wore a medal of honor, and in his mouth he held a sack of spider's eggs. There's no place like home, he thought, and he placed Charlotte's 514 unborn children carefully in a safe corner. The barn smelled good. His friends, the sheep and the geese, were glad to see him back. The geese gave him a noisy welcome. Congratulations, they cried. Nice work. Mr. Zuckerman took the medal from Wilbur's neck and hung it on a nail over the pig pen where visitors could see it. Wilbur himself could look at it too whenever he wanted. In the days that followed, he was very happy. He grew to a great size. He no longer worried about being killed, for he knew that Zuckerman would keep him around as long as he lived. Wilbur often thought of Charlotte. A few strands of her old web still hung in the doorway. Every day Wilbur would stand and look at the torn, empty web, and a lump would come to his throat. No one had ever had such a friend, so affectionate, so loyal, and so skillful. You ever had a friend like that, boys and girls? I'm sure you have. Somebody you love so much, who's been such a wonderful person to you. Those people are very special to have in your life. The autumn days grew shorter. Lurvy brought the squashes and the pumpkins in from the garden and piled them on the barn floor where they wouldn't get nipped on the frosty nights. The maples and birches turned bright colors and the wind shook them as they dropped their leaves onto the ground. Under the wild apple trees in the pasture, the red little apples lay thick on the ground. The sheep gnawed them, and the geese gnawed them, and the foxes came in the night and sniffed them. It covered house, and one evening just before Christmas, snow began to fall. It covered the house and the barn and the fields. Wilbur had never seen snow before. When morning came, he went out and plowed the drifts in his yard for the fun of it. Avery and Fern arrived dragging a sled, and they coasted down the lane and onto the frozen pond. Coasting is the most fun there is, said Avery. Oops. Sorry, I lost my place, boys and girls. The most fun, said, is when the Ferris wheel stops at the top and I'm in the top car and I can see everything for miles and miles. Oh, goodness, are you still thinking about that Ferris wheel? The fair was weeks ago. I think about it all the time, said Fern, picking snow from her ear. After Christmas, the thermometer dropped to 10 below zero. Cold settled onto the world, and the pasture was frozen. The cows stayed in the barn all the time now, except on sunny mornings. The sheep stayed in the barn too for protection. When they were thirsty, they ate snow, and the geese hung around the barnyard the way boys hang around at stores, and Mr. Zuckerman fed them corn and turnips to keep them cheerful. Many, many, many thanks, they always said when they saw the food coming. Templeton moved indoors when winter came. His ratty home under the pig trough was too chilly, so he fixed himself a cozy nest in the barn behind the grain bins. He lined it with bits of dirty newspapers and rags, and whenever he found a trinket or a keepsake, he carried it home and stored it there. He continued to visit Wilbur 3 times a day, exactly at mealtime, and Wilbur kept the promise that he made. Wilbur let the rat eat first. Then, when Templeton couldn't hold another mouthful, Wilbur would eat. As a result of overeating, Templeton grew bigger and fatter than any rat you ever saw. He was gigantic. He was as big as a young woodchuck. Look at him. Look at Templeton. Oh my goodness, have you ever seen a bigger, fatter rat than that, huh? Oh my, too much eating, huh? Isn't that funny? The old sheep spoke to him about his size. You would live longer, said the old sheep, if you ate less. Who wants to live forever, sneered the rat. I'm naturally a heavy eater, and I get satisfaction from the pleasure of the feast. He patted his stomach, grinned at the sheep, and crept upstairs to lie down. All winter, Wilbur watched over Charlotte's egg sack as though he were guarding his own children. He had scooped out a special place in the manure for the sack next to the fence. On very cold nights, he lay so that his breath would warm it. For Wilbur, nothing in life was more important than this round object. Nothing else mattered. Patiently, there's our fruit of the spirit we were talking about, huh? Patience. Patiently, he awaited the end of the winter and the coming of the little spiders. Life is always a rich and steady time when you're waiting for something to happen or hatch. The winter ended at last. I heard the frogs today, said the old sheep. Listen, you can hear them. Wilbur stood and turned his ears. From the pond, in shrill chorus, came the voices of hundreds of little frogs. Springtime, said the old sheep, another spring, and she walked away. Wilbur saw a new lamb following her. It was only a few hours old. The snow melted and ran away. The streams and ditches bubbled and chattered with rushing water. A sparrow with a streaky breast arrived and sang. The light strengthened, the mornings came sooner. Almost every morning there was another new lamb in the sheepfold. The goose were sitting on 9 eggs. The sky seemed wider and warm wind blew. The last remaining strands of Charlotte's old web floated away and vanished. One fine sunny morning after breakfast, Wilbur stood watching his precious sack. He wasn't thinking of anything much. He stood there. He noticed something move. He stepped closer and stared. A tiny spider crawled from the sack. It was no bigger than a grain of sand. Can you imagine how small that is? No bigger than the head of a pin. Its body was gray with a black stripe underneath. Its legs were gray and tan. It looked just like Charlotte. Wilbur trembled all over with joy. The little spider waved at him. Then Wilbur looked more closely. 2 more little spiders crawled out and waved. They climbed around and around on the sack, exploring their new world. Then 3 more little spiders, then 8, then 10. Charlotte's children were here at last. Wilbur's heart pounded. He began to squeal. He raced in circles, kicking the manure into the air. He turned and did a backflip, and then he planted his front feet and came to a stop in front of Charlotte's little children. Hello there, he said. The first spider said hello, but its voice was so small Wilbur couldn't hear it. I'm an old friend of your mother's, said Wilbur. I'm so glad to see you. Are you all right? Is everything all right? The little spiders waved their forelegs at him. Wilbur could see by the way they were acted. They were very glad to see him. Is there anything I can get you? Is there anything you need? The young spiders just waved. For several days and several nights, they crawled here and there, up and down, about and around, waving at Wilbur, trailing tiny little drag lines behind them and exploring their home. There were dozens and dozens of them. Wilbur couldn't count them, but he knew he had a great many new friends. They grew quite rapidly. Soon, each was as big as a little round BB. They made tiny webs near the sack. Then came a quiet morning when Mr. Zuckerman opened the door on the north side. A warm draft of rising air blew softly through the barn cellar. The air smelled of the damp earth, of the spruce woods, and of sweet springtime. The baby spiders felt the warm updraft. One spider climbed to the top of the fence. Then it did something that came as a great surprise to Wilbur. The spider stood on its head, pointed its spinnerets in the air, and let loose a cloud of fine silk. The silk made a balloon. As Wilbur watched, the spider let go of the fence and rose into the air. "Goodbye," it said as it sailed through the doorway. "Well, wait a minute," screamed Wilbur. "Where do you think you're going?" But the spider was already out of sight. Then another baby spider crawled to the top of the fence, stood on its head, made a balloon, and it sailed away. Then another and another. The air was soon filled with tiny balloons, each balloon carrying a little spider. Wilbur was frantic. Charlotte's babies were disappearing at a great rate. "Come back, children," he cried. "Goodbye," they called. "Goodbye, goodbye." Here they go. See them? Oh, making little balloons. And the wind is carrying them into the air. Right? This is what baby spiders do after they hatch. At last, one little spider took time enough to stop and talk to Wilbur before making its balloon. "We're leaving here on the warm updraft. This is our moment for setting forth. We are aeronauts, and we are going out into the world to make webs for ourselves." "But where?" asked Wilbur. "Wherever the wind takes us, high, low, near, far, east, west, north, south, we take to the breeze and we go as we please." "Are all of you going?" asked Wilbur. "You can't all go. I would be left alone with no friends. Your mother wouldn't want that to happen, I'm sure." The air was now so full of balloonists that the barn cellar looked almost as though a mist had gathered. Balloons by the dozen were rising, circling, and drifting away through the doors, sailing off into the gentle wind. Cries of "Goodbye, goodbye" came weakly to Wilbur's ears. He couldn't bear to watch it any more. He sank to the ground and closed his eyes. This seemed like the end of the world to him, to be deserted by Charlotte's children. Wilbur cried himself to sleep. When he woke, it was late afternoon. He looked at the egg sack, and it was empty. He looked into the air. All the balloonists were gone. Then he walked drearily into the doorway where Charlotte's web used to be. He was standing there, thinking of her, and he heard a small voice. "Salutations," it said. "I'm up here." "So am I," said another tiny voice. "Me too," said a third voice. "Three of us are staying. We like this place, and we like you." Wilbur looked up, and at the top of the doorway, 3 small spider webs were being constructed. On each web, working busily, was one of Charlotte's daughters. "Can I take this to mean," asked Wilbur, "that you have definitely decided to live here in the barn cellar and that I'm going to have 3 friends?" "You can indeed," said the spiders. "What are your names, please?" asked Wilbur, trembling with joy. See the spider webs? Oh, there's 3 of them. Look, 1, 2, 3. Oh, thank goodness for Wilbur, huh? He was going to be so sad. But they were all leaving, and 3 of them have stayed. "I'll tell you my name," said the first little spider, "if you tell me why you're trembling." "I'm trembling with joy," said Wilbur. "Then my name will be Joy," said the first spider. "What was my mother's middle initial?" asked the second spider. "A," said Wilbur. "Then my name is Arena," said the spider. "How about me?" said the third spider. "Will you just pick a nice, sensible name for me? Something not too long, not too fancy." Wilbur thought hard. "How about Nellie?" he said. "Fine, I like that very much," said the third spider. You may call me Nellie." She daintily fastened her orb line to the next spoke on her web. Wilbur's heart brimmed with happiness. He felt that he should make a short speech on this very special occasion. "Joy, Arena, Nellie," he began, "welcome to the barn cellar. You have chosen a hallowed doorway from which to string your webs. I think it's only fair to tell you that I was devoted to your mother. I owe my very life to her. She was brilliant, beautiful, and loyal to the end. I shall always treasure her memory. To you, her daughters, I pledge my friendship forever and ever." Boy, would be nice to have a friend like Wilbur, huh? "I pledge mine," said Joy. "I do too," said Arena. "And so do I," said Nellie, who had just managed to catch a small gnat. It was a happy day for Wilbur, and many more happy, tranquil days followed. As time went on, and the months and years came and went, Wilbur was never without friends. Fern did not come regularly to the barn anymore. She was growing up and was careful to avoid childish things like sitting on the milk stool in a pig pen. But Charlotte's children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, year after year, lived in the doorway. Each spring there were new little spiders hatching out to take the place of the old. Most of them sailed away on their balloons, but always 2 or 3 stayed and set up housekeeping in the doorway. Mr. Zuckerman took fine care of Wilbur all the rest of his days, and the pig was often visited by friends and admirers, for nobody ever forgot the year of his triumph and the miracle of the web. Life in the barn was very good, night and day. Winter and summer, spring and fall, dull days and bright days, it was the best place to be, thought Wilbur, this warm, delicious cellar, with the geese and the changing seasons and the heat of the sun and the passage of the swallows, the nearness of the rats, the sameness of the sheep, the love of the spiders and the smell of manure, and the glory of everything. Wilbur never forgot Charlotte. Although he loved her children and grandchildren dearly, none of the new spiders ever quite took her place in his heart. She was in a class all by herself. It is not often that someone comes along who is a true friend and a good writer, and Charlotte was both. All right, boys and girls, we just finished our first chapter book, Charlotte's Web. What did you think? I know, it's one of my very, very favorite books ever. So sometimes you can find there's an animated movie, Charlotte's Web, that goes along with the book. Maybe you can find that to watch. But I always love to read the books first before I watch the movies. So that's Charlotte's Web. I hope you enjoyed that, boys and girls. I loved reading it to you. And I have a new chapter book I'm going to start tomorrow about something a little bit different, not about animals, but about something else that is fun, a fun character we're going to read about. So, all right, boys and girls, hope you enjoy that, and I will see you tomorrow.